Schools to order. Ms. Jenkins, please call the roll. Ms. Jenkins, you're muted.
Sorry, my internet went out for a second. Mr. Barron?
Here.
Miss Bradley?
Here.
Miss Caldwell Johnson? Mr. Cody?
Here.
Miss Della Gardell?
Here.
Miss Martirano?
Here.
And Miss Sawyer?
Here.
I want to welcome all members of our community to our board meeting. We thank all guests, board members, and participants in advance for keeping their microphones muted until it is the appropriate time to speak. If you're interested in speaking to an agenda item, please let us know in the chat or contact Erin Jenkins at erin.jenkins@dmschools.org. The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved.
We have a motion by Martirano.
Second.
And a second by Bradley. Please call the roll call vote.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Miss Bradley?
Yes.
Miss Caldwell
A
Johnson?
second by
I'm sorry,
Bradley.
Mr. Cody?
Please
Yes.
call the roll call vote.
Miss Della Gardell?
Yes.
Miss Martirano?
Yes.
And Miss Sawyer?
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for Monday, August 17th, 2020. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
I move approval.
Second, Cody.
We have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Mr. Cody. Please call the roll call vote.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Miss Bradley?
Yes.
Mr. Cody?
Yes.
Miss Della Gardell?
Yes.
Miss Martirano?
Yes.
Miss Sawyer?
Yes.
The next item on our agenda is the consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to this agenda item, please make sure that you sign up with Erin Jenkins or that you make it known in the chat. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers as comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determination. Ms. Sawyer, I believe you have the consent motion?
Yes, I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $10,440,853.97.
We have a motion by Ms. Sawyer. Is there a second?
Second. Barron.
We have a motion by Ms. Sawyer and a second by Barron. Any discussion or questions? All right, hearing no discussion or questions, Ms. Jenkins, will you please call the vote?
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Miss Bradley?
Yes.
Mr. Cody?
Yes.
Miss Della Gardell?
Yes.
Miss Martirano?
Yes.
And Miss Sawyer?
Yes.
Next on our agenda, we have a public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item D1, hearing on the proposed issuance of approximately $45,960,000 school infrastructure sales, services, and use tax revenue refunding bonds? Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
No, we do not.
Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
Yes, thank you. I recommend the board holds a public hearing and accept the proposed issuance of approximately $45,960,000 school infrastructure sales, service, and use tax revenue refunding bonds.
All right, may I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and the superintendent's recommendation?
I move approval.
Second, Bradley.
We have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Ms. Bradley. Any questions or discussion from my board colleagues? Tom, for the benefit of our public, could you or Mr. Aurora let us know what is the approximated savings by going out to do this at this time, or what's the benefit to the district for those following along at home?
Yeah, so this is essentially the same process as refinancing a mortgage. So the interest market for bonds has changed in our favor in this regard. So these are bonds that were previously issued, and we're essentially reissuing them at a more competitive interest rate for the district. And over the life of the bonds, that will equate to about a $4.5 million net benefit to the district.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion? All right, Ms. Jenkins, please call the roll call vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Mr. Barron,
Sorry. Yes.
give a gosh, Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martorano,
Yes.
and Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. We do not have any other items on our agenda this evening, nor do we have any information only items, as long as I read the agenda correctly this evening. So we're now on to items of privilege. I don't have a lot to share with my board colleagues on my behalf. Do other board colleagues have any comments or updates to share? Ms. Bradley, did you want to give an update on our ad hoc committee from last meeting?
Yes, I could do that. We actually just met with AJ on Saturday, and we are going to be giving a recommendation on how we should move forward. And that's something that I'll be sharing with Tom during our agenda planning, and then board, I'll also be sending an email to you all to keep you updated on that. And then once I give that recommendation to Tom, then we will have some other further recommendations that I think will help us in our process as we really start to dig into our student governance framework.
Awesome, thank you. We look forward to further updates. If no other board members have any items of privilege this evening, I can turn it over to Dr. Ahart for his report.
Thank you. I did just release a message that'll go out via Phil's office to our staff and community. I know that there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty moving into the 2020-2021 school year. We were desperately hoping, I was desperately hoping back in March that we would be in a much different place as a community, as a state, as a country relative to the pandemic by the time the opening of school rolled around. But alas, we're actually in worse shape. We've had a number of challenges regarding not just the pandemic, but also navigating our way forward with a very fluid situation regarding guidance coming from the Department of Education and the governor's office. So I know that that has put a strain on our community. It's put a strain on our staff. It's put a strain on our students. And I want to apologize for that. I can tell you that we are giving every effort to charting a clear course forward, but there are a number of very huge factors that are not exclusively within the board's control. So we do have a hearing scheduled on Friday for the injunction for which we filed a couple of weeks ago, and we likely will not have an answer, a judge's answer to our request for an injunction on Friday, but hopefully we will have that next week. But in the interim, we will move forward with starting the school year in remote learning, virtual learning, if you will. And we will continue on with our extracurricular activities, just as the board had voted on a couple of weeks ago. And we will continue working with the governor's office, the Department of Education, and Polk County District Court to provide as much clarity for all of us as soon as we possibly can. The health and safety of our students, of our staff, of their families, and of the greater community is really what's at stake here. And so we will continue to provide the best educational opportunities, both academic and extracurricular, as we can, while we hold as the top priority protecting everyone's health and safety. So we will continue to share new information as we have it. I do want to say that we've done extensive research on state code as it relates to issuing credit to students. And we are supremely confident that the state cannot take away credit from students who have successfully completed courses for credit. I have included that in tonight's message. The actions that would be taken by the state would be directed toward the school district's accreditation, and that's something that we can successfully navigate. So I want to put all of our students and their families at ease in that regard, at least, especially for our high school students, where as a freshman, you start earning credit toward graduation. That's the first time we really start counting credits toward graduation. And we see no issues with that whatsoever. So the district will take on whatever slings and arrows come our way from a legal perspective, but that will not have a direct impact on students as it relates to credit. Finally, I just want to share that we just learned, we got official word today that one of our beloved teachers from Ruby Van Meter passed away due to COVID complications yesterday. This teacher was out of state visiting relatives and apparently contracted it there. We don't know that for certain, but she returned home and was ill and suffered for about 2 weeks before finally succumbing to COVID-19. She's not had contact with fellow staff members or students since last March when the district closed down and went to remote learning. But I want to send my sympathies to her family, and I want everyone to remember that we've lost over 183,000 American citizens to COVID-19 since we started facing the grim reality of this pandemic in March. And in Polk County, we are in worse shape now than when we shut schools down in March. The long-term health impacts on individuals of all ages who contract the disease even after they recover are lifelong, and there's a better than 50% chance that you will have long-term health complications as a result of suffering through a bout of COVID. And there's recent evidence from multiple places internationally that indeed you can contract COVID after you've contracted it once, you can contract it again. So I just want to urge everyone listening and to continue to advocate for taking appropriate precautions, frequently washing hands with soap and water. If that's not available, using a hand sanitizer with the appropriate strength of alcohol in it. To please wear face covering, a face mask preferably, anytime you're outside of your home, and to physically distance as much as possible. Collectively, we really can turn the corner on the spread of the virus in our community. And the sooner we collectively decide to do that, the sooner we can have our students back in our schools with our staff, which is where they all belong, and where we can do our best work and provide the best opportunities for our children's future. But we don't want to do that at the risk of their health. So I'm just pleading with everyone to please follow the science, do what's right, not only for your own personal health, but for the health of your family and for everyone with whom you come into contact. And we'll all be the better for it. Well, that's all I have for tonight, Kirsten. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart. And the board's thoughts and condolences are with the family of that teacher. And I'm so glad that you were able to provide some good news, though, for our students regarding credits and some other things this evening. So thank you so much for that update. Without any further business before us, the meeting is adjourned and our work session will begin here momentarily. I have to say that's the quickest meeting I think we've had in a couple months.
I think you're right.
So we just got started, so I don't think anybody probably needs a break. I mean, 16 minutes later. So I'm just going to go ahead and open us back up with our work session this evening. We have a couple items in front of us. I think there's an update on return to learn. And then the board needs to kind of pull together our data request on SROs for Dr. Ahart and his team. So why don't we start with return to learn, Dr. Ahart, so that way anybody who needs to hop off the call can, and the board can finish its business with you following that around finalizing our SRO. Does that sound like a good plan?
That sounds great.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and turn it over to you then to give us our update.
Okay, so on this first item, we won't have a lot of discussion on this, but and board members are already aware of this, but we have some others on the line. We do have the our hearing in Polk County District Court for our injunction on Friday morning. So we are actively preparing for those arguments. And while we don't anticipate a response prior to the start of the school year, which is on Tuesday after the Monday holiday, and our hearing won't be over probably until sometime around noon or early afternoon on Friday, I was encouraged to see that we did get that scheduled prior to the start of the school year. So having not gone through this before, and this being really new territory for everyone involved, including the judge, we don't know when we will have a decision, but we're hopeful that we will have a decision prior to the end of next week on the injunction. The schedule for the judicial review is yet to be determined. So more on that to come, and hopefully more on that to come soon. In regards to the return to learn update, I did send to the board the schedule such as it stands right now that our individual schools have created in communicating with their with the families that they serve. It worked better because of particular circumstances unique to each school, that each school do that as a school community rather than doing it as a district-wide community. That's not the list that I sent earlier today continues to have additions to it. And so I will forward new updates to that as they come in. So we feel like we're in actually in all things considered really good shape for the start of the school year. Most of our devices have been distributed. If you remember, we have decided to assign a device to each of our students, and they will keep that device with them, whether they're in remote learning or in the event that we're into in-person learning at some point in the future. So we will officially be a one-to-one district. We're in the process of distributing internet connectivity to those families that need it. And our teachers, I can tell you, I've seen multiple examples of work that teachers have done to creatively welcome their students and their students' families back to the school year and get them excited for what will be really an adventure for everyone. A year ago at this time, we could not have fathomed that we would be where we are, but I am extremely proud of how our teachers have really embraced this as a challenge, and know that we'll be able to continue to serve our students extremely well. And while I don't consider this ideal by any stretch, I think in terms of trying to serve students remotely, I don't think there's a district better positioned or better prepared to move forward with the school year than DMPS. That's, I think, the thumbnail sketch of where we are. We continue to work through on a case-by-case basis each of our students that have IEPs. We will be serving, I'll remind our community, we will be serving some students face-to-face in very carefully controlled physical settings so as to not spread the virus. But we have some students with IEPs, we have some students with ELL needs, and we have a number of high school students, hundreds literally, who are enrolled in concurrent enrollment courses in conjunction with a number of community college partners, primarily DMAC, but also Iowa Western and Indian Hills. And we want to continue to provide those opportunities. So that will also be taking place in person at Central Campus in very carefully controlled social distancing settings. We will be sending updates to families with information as we have been doing regularly, but we're going to step that up to at least one communication daily from here on out, at least through the first week of school, and then we'll sort of reevaluate and see where we are. There's lots of information, and I know the board has received some of this. There are well-documented issues with COVID-19 data reporting in our state. And there are lots of very well-intended folks in our community attempting to sense make out of various sources of information. It gets complicated very quickly. And so what I am doing is taking samples that we've received from some community members and sharing those with Polk County Health Department in the hopes that they can help us understand what really is in the numbers. I would also offer without hopefully, I mean, everything these days seems to be hyper politicized, and that's the last thing that I want to do, is to further that dynamic in this discussion. But it is evident in speaking with various public officials as we try to forge our way forward that there's a great reluctance to speak on the record on topics that have been called into question in the media. And so finding what the real truth is, especially in regards to our data, statewide data, and especially Polk County data specifically, that has just added another element of complication and frustration. That's not unique to us, but because of the approach that we're taking, it seems more acutely impactful to us. So we continue to forge a path based on what we can glean from information available as the most accurate information available. And there's a clamoring from some parts of the community to better understand the metrics that we will be using to make decisions. I know I've shared a draft of the metrics that I intend to use for deciding on the instructional modality of the district. We still have another one relative to student and staff absenteeism that that our Return to Learn response team is crafting. And I think we'll have that to share with the board by the end of this week. But I just want to, for the benefit of the greater community, let you know that the goal of the metrics is largely twofold. One, protect the health and safety of everyone involved, and two, that we structure those in such a way that when we change how we're delivering instruction, that we can be relatively confident at the time that decision is made that we won't have to, in a very short period of time, revert back to virtual instruction. I've heard some commentary from some parents in other districts that are really struggling with where they are right now, and lots of debate about if they'll continue in person or if they'll continue in person in a different format, some sort of hybrid format, or if they'll go all virtual. And I know that this entire situation has been hugely stressful and challenging for families, but I think the best thing that we can do is to provide as much stability as possible. And, all virtual certainly is challenging for everyone, but being all virtual and then transitioning to a hybrid or transitioning to fully in person and only staying in that mode for 2 or 3 weeks and then shifting back to virtual just really wreaks havoc on everyone's sense of stability and their ability to just execute, the basic responsibilities of their life. So impacting the metrics is that, along with understanding that we really don't have really clean data on which to base our decisions. And so my approach is relatively conservative in that regard, erring on the side of caution rather than getting everyone back in person prematurely, causing the havoc of having to go back and forth, and also hopefully avoiding any negative health impacts on individuals. So that's a summation of where we are right now, and I'd open it up to questions, and I'd also ask. I know Matt's on the call. If Matt may have some additional detail that he may want to add as well.
I don't think I have anything specifically to add to that, Tom. I thought you covered it really, really well. But I'm certainly able to answer any questions that might be the board might have.
I do have a quick question. Well, hopefully it's a quick question, I guess. In regards to the internet connectivity, do we have a general idea how many people needed that after this spring? Like how many had it and lost it, and what percent of the way are we to getting everybody hooked up?
What's that, Matt?
You want me to jump in with an answer?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So based on right now we're reconciling our spring numbers with our most recent data set with his online registration. And again, inquiring with families about any changes that may have come about. So to answer your question specifically, we have about 7,000 families that are in need of a device or some sort of access to internet connectivity. So right now we've got a sort of a multi-pronged approach where we've got MediaCom access where we've installed in nearly 1,000 homes. That was beginning in the spring. Those MediaCom access points are still live and they are still operable. We also deployed about 2,500 MiFi devices during the spring as well. working with Verizon and US Cellular. We've most recently, over the course of the summer months, ordered 5,500 hotspots from T-Mobile. The challenge right now we're having with T-Mobile, just because of the demand of MiFis all over the country, not just here in Iowa or in Des Moines, is getting those hotspots delivered to us. We received an installment of 500 of them just today. And in conversations with T-Mobile, we're expecting another installment of 500 in the next 2 days. And so beyond that, they can't give us an exact answer to that. So we're working with them to try to expedite the manufacturing and then, of course, the delivering of that. So we met as a team actually this afternoon, right before this meeting, to continue to problem solve, to make sure that we are touching base with all of our families and that we're utilizing all of the hotspots that we do have in our possession, as well as continuing to work with MediaCom. So we've got a couple of other potential strategies that we're exploring right now for the interim until those hotspots actually make it into DMPS's hands. I'll stop there and see if there's any more questions about that.
So we're partway through an order of 5,500 hotspots. Are we worried about folks not having access at the start of the year then?
Yes, sir, we are.
Yeah, that's new news as of today, because we had made the orders timely and we're guaranteed delivery prior to the start of the year. So we're problem solving that. We do have a couple of other avenues that we can pursue. And we're trying to do that in as fiscally responsible a manner as possible, obviously. So, hopefully prior to the end, probably not the end of the day tomorrow, but the end of the day Thursday, will be a lot clearer as to how much of an impact there might be. The other thing that we need to drill back down into is that the number of families reporting the need for connections went up pretty significantly from last spring to this fall. And understanding that situation better, I think there may be one of the things that we may need to drill down into the data more clearly with is do we have duplicate requests based on multiple child households and so forth, because there was a striking increase once we got all the data pulled together from online registration. So we're parsing through that as well.
On this stuff, I just want to come back to a conversation you and I had a couple of weeks ago about private funding for this stuff too, and remind you on that. So, whenever we need to go there, please let me know how I can be helpful. I think other folks on the board would probably feel similarly.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Tom, I was also going to say, I know it's not exactly the same, but I've been receiving updates from MediaCom, because I'm a MediaCom customer, of them pushing out additional Wi-Fi enabled, like free public Wi-Fi in the Cedar Rapids area following the derecho, and that kind of going down so folks can get some access. I don't know if you could discuss with MediaCom about maybe doing something similar in some of our neighborhood parks and some of the other areas that don't traditionally have Wi-Fi, if MediaCom would be willing to help us out on that. And I know that that's not ideal for families, but it's better. It could be slightly more comfortable because there's picnic tables and some other things for families to utilize rather than just sitting in their cars in parking lots or something similar.
That's a great point, Kirsten. There are a few smaller areas, mostly in the downtown area, that and one or two other spots around the city where MediaCom has blanketed Wi-Fi. So we'll be certainly pointing those out. The other thing that we have some ability to do, which actually could be pretty impactful, is expanding the throw from our individual buildings, so that families can get, if they can get to one of our buildings outside of the buildings, and garner access there. So that'll be something that we'll be talking about in our problem solving discussion during Chiefs tomorrow morning. And certainly there are ways that we could accentuate those spaces to make them more accommodating than just, as you said, sitting in your car. So yeah, this is the supply chain has been a challenge really since last spring, and we felt like we were timely, and certainly our vendor said we were timely in the delivery of these hotspots, and we actually were very liberal in deciding how many we would need to make sure that we had everyone absolutely covered. So this is a most frustrating situation for us right now, but we'll certainly do our best to rectify it as expeditiously as possible.
Tom, how are you guys connecting with those families and giving them these updates and making sure they're aware that you're working on it, but it may not be as quickly as possible?
Well, it will be as quickly as possible. It just probably, in some instances, it won't be quite on time. So Matt, do you have something to add here?
I was just going to add that those schools are doing virtually nightly communications with this particular topic. This is information as of about an hour ago, so that has not gone out yet. So the team has been meeting about it just prior to this board meeting, and then we will reconvene after this board meeting.
Okay. And are you guys doing that? Are you connecting with these families via email? Are you physically calling them? I mean, just so that they're aware. I mean, I just want to make sure that they're actually being connected with and have those updates.
It's all the above. It goes through Infinite Campus. It goes through School Connects, phone calls, text messages. Yep. And schools do track their contact logs.
Tom, I'm curious about our special education team members, and certainly don't need to provide this tonight, but I'm wondering how many of our teachers will be in brick and mortar and how many of our students, due to those IEPs, 504s, EL requirements, are going to be serviced in the buildings.
Yeah, I don't have hard numbers on that, but that's certainly something that I can get back to the board when we're a little bit closer to the end of the week, because that's a fluid number right now, but absolutely.
Have we adjusted our transportation for those students with IEPs that will be transporting to the buildings?
Yeah, we will be providing transportation. Yeah, and that's actually one of the challenges is how do we coordinate that so that we're picking up and getting students to school at the appropriate time, and also not leaving them at school longer than when they're actually going to be with the teacher and or associate that are providing the services. Yeah, so that's one thing I will say is we do have transportation capacity right now. So it may not be particularly efficient in terms of cost per mile, but we certainly have the capacity to provide the appropriate transportation.
So this is just a quick question, not necessarily directly on our return to learn plan. I know that Iowa City and ISEA also filed suit. Do we know, did they already have their hearing or what? I haven't been paying attention.
No, their initial hearing is scheduled for Thursday in Johnson County, this Thursday, the 3rd. And on that note, I don't believe Ames has a date scheduled yet, but they're pursuing a course almost identical to ours.
And Iowa City already had their waiver for 2 weeks virtual already approved. And did Ames apply or was that approved? I know it looked like they were going to maybe go virtual, but
Ames applied early at about the same times, I believe, at about the same time that Iowa City did originally. Both were denied. Iowa City applied again and was approved, and I'm not sure of the status of Ames. I do believe they applied again, I think, but I've lost track of whether they were approved or not.
It looks like the chat says they were approved today. Ames, that is.
Okay. Yep. Josh reports they were approved, and I trust that to be true. Thanks, Josh.
So, Tom, if there are no further board member questions or you don't have any further updates for us, I don't know if Matt has anything else for us, but I'll just.
No, I think that pretty much sums it up.
Okay.
Actually, I do have a question now that I think about it. How has the beginning of the year orientation been going for some of these schools? The reason I ask is I drove by King today and there was a full parking lot. Like, are people in these buildings getting ready for the year, or what's this look like?
Yeah, so staff members, so that's an interesting question. So there's been an interesting debate around the country about schools who are starting with remote learning, all remote learning. And there are a number of districts, particularly in California, that wanted to require teachers to teach from their classroom when in remote learning. Now, that's not something that we ever considered requiring, but we do have a number of teachers who would prefer, for a variety of very legitimate reasons, to teach from their classroom, even though their students would not be there. Part of that is because they have all of their stuff in their classroom. And maybe more importantly is that, especially at the elementary level, they can recreate virtually routines and help visually transition students from one learning topic to another. So we've just made either option available to our teaching staff, but the expectation when staff members are in a building is that they're extremely observant of all of our COVID mitigation strategies. So we expect teachers to be in their classroom alone when they're in any kind of a shared space, whether that's a hallway or the office, the restroom facilities, etc., that they are masked and they are physically distancing. So at King, I can't speak to King specifically today, but the professional development continues to be offered virtually because as I've stated with our team a number of times since March, but particularly in the last month or so, we essentially closed our buildings down except for absolutely necessary staff being present for critical functions. And we've opened that up a little bit just because people need more access to things that they didn't realize they were abandoning in March for the long term. But it feels like every time we try to take one baby step toward further opening the buildings, it turns in very quickly into 2 or 3 really big steps. And so we as humans revert back to what we're accustomed to, and it becomes really easy for very conscientious, well-intended folks to fall into prior habits that weren't bad habits then, but have become bad habits now. So we're really trying to be sticklers about that, much to the annoyance sometimes to our staff. But it's really critical that we're modeling to our community and to our students and their families best practice as it relates to mitigating this virus, because we really desperately want everyone to be back in school, and we really can't accomplish that unless we largely keep everyone out of congregate settings until we have much better evidence that the spread of the virus is under control in our area, and we certainly are nowhere near that right now. And I don't, Matt, if I missed something there, feel free to chime in.
No, I don't think you did, Tom. I think you hit it pretty well. The school leaders have been giving guidance and instructions around ensuring that staff in the building continue to maintain social distancing, wear the mask at all times, and they're doing a good job of that. But to Tom's point, we still have teachers that are getting ready for the school year. We might have some that are working from their classrooms because that's the most conducive environment for them to be able to instruct in a virtual modality. Some teachers will be staying home. School leaders are working that out with their school leadership teams and with their staff directly. Because as you know, there's so many unique circumstances that each staff member faces. So we're taking those on an individual but case-by-case basis with staff members to provide them with the best and most conducive environment for delivering a virtual instruction.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I get you want to have your calendar and your stickmen and all that around, especially for those younger grades. But I would like to say out loud, just be smart and be careful, especially after the news we got tonight about that other teacher. Mm-hmm. One is too many. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Bill's on the call. Bill, not to call you out, but Bill shared some thoughts with me. Bill Good, our Chief Operations Officer, has occasion to, for obvious reasons, to be in and out of our buildings physically more than many of the rest of us do. And he shared with me in our one-on-one on Monday just how encouraged he was from interactions, physically distanced, masked interactions. Just want to emphasize just the esprit de corps and the just really taking on this new challenge, positive spirit that he witnessed from our instructional staff. And that was really encouraging, but not surprising to hear. We have some extremely dedicated staff who have rolled with some very unpredictable situations now for 6 months. And also, I just want to recognize too that, summer was a different experience. We always hope that summer is a time for teachers to have at least a few moments to decompress and kind of get work-life balance back in equilibrium, and to be recharged and healthy and energized for the start of the next school year. And I know that the uncertainty that we were facing moving into the fall was kind of a cloud over everyone's summer this year, and they've just responded beautifully. So I think we have a lot to be proud of with the DMPS team and how they've decided to really be advocates and champions for our kids despite the really challenging circumstances.
All right. Thanks, Tom. If board colleagues don't have anything further, I think we can probably move into our second topic for the evening, which is to kind of finalize our questions for the SROs. Kelly, I know that you compiled this originally. I don't know if you want to take a minute to lead this. Do you want to lead this conversation? Do you want me to?
No, I'm I'm fine to do that. I mean, it just is, yeah, I just got Terry's comments before the meeting, so I did print off that copy as well. So what I sent to you guys the end of our meeting last week was really my brain dump around, I'm a data person and I like to look at everything. And so it may not necessarily be what we need, but I just threw it all out there because that's what was coming to my mind of information I was kind of seeking. So that's what I threw out to you guys to get some feedback and additions if I missed some things. So I don't know if we could take it question by question and kind of walk through to see they're about, with the addition of some additional questions that I received, there are a total of, I think, 19 questions. So we can walk it through there. The first, and I'm hoping that you guys all have the draft maybe in front of you. Okay, I'm seeing some nods. And Tom, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Sorry. If you're in board docs, I did attach, and thank you for the reminder, Kelly, earlier today, that document that Kelly put together is in the is an attachment under the work session agenda item, so you can open that up and see it there if you're in board docs.
Okay, thank you. So the first question, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm guessing that some of these are not tracked. Do we want to just eliminate those off the bat, Tom, or are all of these in fact feasible points of conversation?
Well, I don't know if I can make a judgment on all of them, and some of them I don't have an immediate answer to, but I think probably we can piece it together. So I think if we, and I guess the other thing is, if there are some items in here that we can't give a specific response to, I can bring back something as close to what it seemed like the spirit of the question was. So I think if we take it holistically, and then we'll do our level best to get, if not the exact letter of the request, at least the spirit of the request when meeting the letter of the request isn't possible.
Okay. Yeah, and I will rely on you. Like I said, I don't have a lot of this information, so definitely rely on you and your team to provide that feedback of what's potentially available to us. So first question was really just describing that transformation. I pulled that question from a comment that Terry made in our meeting and wanting kind of that background context to really start the discussion. And that was a comment she had made on the notes as well. So that was really, it's a great, way to set the tone and history for the relationship with SROs.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else had comments on that. Seeing none, or Kirsten? Okay.
I was just going to say, I think for context for our sake and for our community, I think we should move ahead with that.
Okay, perfect. So we got that. Second question, this was how, and I described them as incidents. How many incidents have SROs been involved with in schools over the past 3 years? So that maybe just whatever that connection is. I'm not sure how they are defined or even tracked within the schools. And I said over 3 years, knowing that we had to give some sort of historical context. Is 3 years appropriate? Do we want something longer? So I just threw that number out there. So that was where I was coming from.
Rather than a number, could we get a percentage on that?
Percentage.
Percentage.
So number of incidents based on the total overall. I think that will give us some context of this is the total number of incidents occurring, and this is the total number of incidents occurring that involve the SRO.
Okay.
Okay.
So for instance,
I don't think a number will give us necessarily what we're looking for.
Okay. Are you saying, for instance, there were 100 occurrences of physical violence, but the SRO was involved in 8 of them or something like that?
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I've gotten that. I added that to the list.
The only And I understand that. I think that contextually that makes sense. I'm fine with that. But the point I was going to raise up on this one is I think it would be meaningful to know the like the from the PD side of it, how do they qualify? So when they write a report for so it's a call for a weapon or it's a call for a fight. What I would like to know is how many of those incidents they've had over those 3 years. So how many weapons calls did they respond to, either the SRO or a uniformed police officer? Is that a reasonable request?
I want to make sure I fully understand this, Rob. So you're saying incidents that that SROs have responded to have resulted in how much percentage or number of incidents responded to by SROs result in something that's documented with the DMPD?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean the N on that one is kind of tricky. Because you can get a call, like an officer could respond to an incident but not make an arrest. But I think that would be probably challenging to get or to collect in the SRO context. So I'm fine if it's just number of instances where the SRO made an arrest and what those were for, broken down by category.
Okay. Yep. I got that. All right.
And then that ties nicely to a future question, which is number 5, which I was looking for outcomes, but that's the same thing. Like, was the result a formal charge? Was it something else? So looking for for me, that was an outcome that I was looking for. So that ties to number 5 as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's all kind of in the same bucket, if you will. Yeah, I'm going to link that. I'm adding some to the bottom of the list, and I'll reference what is now number 20 with number 5, so we combine those.
Okay.
Holistically.
And then the next question, which I think could be any and all of the above, but really disaggregated data and looking at our race, gender, grade. School for me, I was more or less not like each individual school, but was it high school, middle school? If there was, an IEP or a special education designation for a student or an ELL.
Gotcha.
An ELL student. So looking for that disaggregate data.
Yep.
So we could compare.
Sure. That makes sense.
Okay, I'm moving into number 4. Is everybody on number 4 with me? Okay. I think, I think it all kind of ties together with number 2, 4, 5. What were the reasons for those? So for me, reasons was it a physical assault? Was it a weapons charge? Was it a fight or drugs? I mean, what was the reason for an SRO call? So that's kind of that same thing with incidents. So some duplication there.
And related to all of that stuff, one thing that I just kind of think about is, and I'm not even sure how to measure this really. There's plenty of ways to measure this, but just how busy are these SROs, right? Are they doing stuff all day, every day at each school? Are they doing stuff once a week? Like, what is their usage rate, I guess, would be a way to say that.
Forgot to unmute myself again. No, that's a good question. I'll have to talk about how we measure that, because part of the goal of the program is that we have officers that are well acquainted with the students and have relationships with students, and so because that helps in a number of ways when something does arise that we think would otherwise require regular police involvement, and hopefully we can lessen those and certainly lessen the severity of those. But I'll have to think with the team on how to best capture that. But I think I completely get at what you're getting at, Kaylin. I'll try to figure out how to phrase that. But
Okay. So looking at number 6, which number 6 kind of aligns again with number 5, and that was more, I think somebody brought up restorative justice when we had our meeting on Thursday. And so I don't even know if there is an opportunity for restorative justice responses and in the use of SROs, but just curious if that is a response, do we have data to talk about it?
We can certainly, in terms of actually hard and fast data, I don't know, but we can certainly create a picture of what it, what it looks like, and we'll do our best to have actual numbers to it in a meaningful, genuinely representative way. These are great questions, and this actually largely gets to why this is so challenging, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Any other thoughts before we move into number 7? So we're kind of collecting that, what are incidents, who the kids are, and responses. So number 7, I was looking for recidivism and looking at are there some, are there reasons that some kids would be interacting with our SROs multiple times? What might that be? I guess I will share, like, my context is, like, what are some things we could do to help alleviate that? And so are there ways we can help kids in that situation? So I don't even know, again, if that's data that's collected.
And Kelly, when you say recidivism, are you referring to someone who actually becomes a student who formally becomes engaged with the criminal justice system and then has a repeated engagement, or perhaps incidents that don't get them, quote, into the system? But do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And I think it could be any and all the above. And again, I don't even know if that's data that's collected, but it's more or less, if we see a kid that's continually connecting or interacting with an SRO, is there some other form of intervention we could be looking at that could support that student in the educational environment versus continuing connections with the SROs? So.
And I suppose it'd be plausible that if they had 100 calls, 40 of them might be one kid. And is that kind of what you're getting at, Kelly?
Right. And that too, yeah. I mean, are there repetitive patterns that we're seeing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The next, number 8, which could actually kind of tie to number 9 too, but it's that professional development plan for SROs and who's responsible for training. And that does align with our management limitation in some way with that 2.1 of making sure there is a professional development structure that is reflective of the diversity's equity plan. And so not sure if there is a plan yet in place, Tom. I know it's something that we would want to see if that is, and if not, then when could we expect a plan to be in place?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's something that's in process. It's not in place the way we want it in place right now. Then we can explain the reasons behind that, but it does get to a dynamic between the culture of a school district and the culture of a police department, which again kind of gets at the nut of what that we're trying to crack with this whole dynamic. So yeah, that's absolutely something that we can provide.
Okay. And then number 10 was looking at the professional development for staff. And I think that too was referenced last week of, our staff understanding when to call an SRO or when that should be somebody else in the building. So just understanding that context of how everybody's learning about everyone's role.
Right.
Do you
go ahead.
know, Tom, are SROs holding any sort of small group, or in the spirit of that restorative justice, are they having any interaction with students in a small group environment or a one-on-one environment? And that can be something you can add to your list.
Yeah, I'll add that to the list. Yeah, there definitely is some of that, but I can't. So sorry. Let me just add that real quick. And Kim, you mean specific to a restorative justice themed, I guess, convening?
Yes. So when we are seeing those students with a high frequency, perhaps having some small group conversations, maybe in conjunction with a counselor or a social worker, that sort of thing. I don't know if that's a part of the processes now, or if that's something that is in the plans. I know Jake had outlined possible solutions with needed resources to go down that path.
Got it.
I was going to say, if you were to look historically at the role of a social worker in a school setting, it would be that they are providing those groups and are working with kids in those types of settings. But I think, unfortunately, we've often shifted our social workers to IEP maintenance in some ways. So it'd be great to see them get back to that true root of what that profession could do in a school setting. And Kirsten, I see your hand is up.
I don't know if you were all on when I was talking with Aaron, but my computer can't connect to my monitor, so I've got two computers going because I'm looking at different things. So I think I accidentally hit that. I apologize.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, I think, Kelly, what you're saying is absolutely correct about social workers. I think that, like in many other places of society, things that traditionally other roles might play, we're substituting in police officers. And I think the question you're asking gets at the heart of how much is that happening in our system, because we know it's happening. So how much is it happening?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Let me see. I'm looking at number 11. I think now is what the number I'm on.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really how often are SROs called to the classroom to manage an issue, which could tie into the previous question of the training of staff and when to call SROs, or if that's a question should be a response from somebody else in the building. But not sure if that's happening, but definitely of interest. If it is, how often is that happening, and does that become a training issue? And I don't know if that's necessarily anything we need to know. I guess, again, in my brain dump, that was a question that I was thinking through.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. Oh, number 12 was another thing that I heard from a theme perspective last week, which was, what is the view of SROs in the building from building leadership perspective, students and family perspective? So just some comments I want to lift up from Terry were, what's the plan for collecting that student feedback and making sure we are collecting the student voice throughout this process as well.
Yeah.
Let's see. Number 13, have complaints against SROs been received by the district? If so, what patterns were found? Like, were there for certain SROs that had complaints? Or is there lack of training for SROs? What's the reason for complaint? Again, not sure if there's a complaint process, so I just kind of highlighted that. Looking for if, are we seeing concerns from students or families with regards to response by SROs?
Okay.
So looking for themes on that.
Mm-hmm.
The number 14, what is the average length of placement of an SRO in the building? And that is really around, are they there for 6 months? And do they swap out? Are they there for many years?
Mm-hmm.
Did they start to learn the culture of the school environment? Part of that is relationships. You start to build relationships with with your students or the students in the building as well as faculty. So I'm just kind of curious. I don't know how they're placed, if DMPD determines who is in those settings, if this, I just don't know. So I was just kind of curious what the average length of placement was.
And I think this is a crucial question, because one of the foundational tenets is building these relationships. And if you're not doing there for any length of time, you can't build those relationships. So therefore, what are we getting besides a patrolman?
Right. Yeah, that's a good, very, very good point.
And just anecdotally, I know I've been aware for a long time that we've had some really long-serving SROs. And for the newer board members that aren't as familiar with it, when we're meeting in person, typically that officer that's at the meeting is an SRO who's doing that. It's usually one, but sometimes it flips around a little bit.
Yep.
That's good to know. Thank you, Rob. Let me see. That was number 14. So number 15, part of me wasn't maybe fully listening last week on the cost piece. And I know, Kaylin, you had asked the question of the cost. And so I just was more or less verifying. I thought I heard Bill say it was like for the second half of the year, the school district's responsibility, or that the cost was $600,000. And so I couldn't remember if that was all DMPS cost or if that was half DMPS, half DMPD.
Yeah, what we need to do, I think, because I was in that conversation on Thursday, I was recalling where we've been with this, and so we need to, I think, create sort of a timeline and give actual, sharing percentages, but also actual cost, because we had and I need to actually research some of this history before my time too, but there were federal grants that helped support the SRO program, years ago. And that's kind of how the relationship, as I understand it, got started with DMPS and DMPD. And we're always in some degree of budget strain. And a few years ago, we pulled the Council of the Great City Schools to get their, what their contracts between districts and local police departments looked like. And so we went back with that information. We went back to the city and renegotiated not the breakdown in percentage, but what was included in the total package, because there's the actual officer, and then there's equipment and vehicle and, any number of other potential expenses. And so we actually reduced that amount pretty significantly. And then we did that again when we added 2 officers. And so it's not 100% clear in my mind that this year it cost this much, this year it cost this much. So I think if I'll create, I think I should do that on a sort of over time, how the number of officers and how what's contained in that 60-40 split, and how that impacts the numbers. So yeah, that's a great question and something that would be useful for all of us to have laid out.
And I'll lift up too, Terry had the comment in here of total budget for SROs and other security functions in DMPS.
Yeah.
What are the other security functions that we fund?
Right. Yep.
Okay. And number 16, have we talked to DMPD about placing non-uniformed and unarmed police in buildings, and what are their thoughts? So just lifting up that question. And then, number 17, what is the average response time of officers from outside of the building, and what multiple police arrive? Are there extras other than SROs, or are they from a general pool?
Yeah, that's a great question too, because one of the things that we've had to work with the city on is, in the past, when we've had one officer at each of the high schools, including Central Campus, and then which also housed Scavo, and then 2 officers that split the middle schools. Oftentimes, when one of those officers was unable to be at work, another officer was not provided, and so response time was obviously impacted. At least response time for an SRO, which is what our preferred response would be when we have that need. So yeah, that's something that bears some more research by me and the team to share with the board. But that's a great question.
Okay. Number 18, how does each officer end up assigned to a building? We know they're appointed by the chief, but do they volunteer to be placed in one of our buildings? And is it a popular position amongst police officers? So information gathering, trying to see how they end up in their buildings. And the last,
go ahead,
Galen.
Yeah, my main thought in all of that, it's kind of a wordy, jumbly question, but my main thought is, I mean, do our SROs want to be here? I'd much rather have a person, being in a school, a person needs to be wired a little differently than the general population. And I've worked at schools where this person very clearly preferred being an SRO. When I was in Phoenix, I had one who she was wonderful and she loved being there. I've also had other ones who were still just cops doing cop things. And I guess I just want to know more about that background, about who gets in our buildings.
Yeah, and that's, you know, a couple of years ago, I spent some time with the prior sergeant who was in charge of that, Sergeant Sintizo, and he's since moved on to another position. But I think we talked about that a decent amount, and I think though there's always turnover, I think we've had some pretty long-standing ones. Roosevelt, I think I can think of for sure, and a few others. So I think it'll be good to see that information.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the last question, if there are any ramifications beyond longer wait time to breaking our contract early. So again, another kind of information piece to include in the data set. So those were the questions that were shared with board members. I don't know if there are others that you all want to lift up and add to that list.
Thank you, Kelly, for compiling that.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And I would just add that I've added 3 additional just from the discussion, and am happy to add more if there are more, if there's more interest from our board members.
And I would say Terry, when she sent hers, did lift up. There were about 7 questions, additional ones. I apologize. I should have. I need to come back to these. But what role do SROs? What is the role of SROs in addressing our board goals and student-centered outcomes? Do SROs favor or otherwise impact a student's classroom outcome or success? Are the actions of our SROs or the district's application of the student code of conduct and discipline policy disproportionately impacting any one group of students?
Could you repeat that last one? I'm sorry, Kelly. I was trying to take notes.
Are the actions of our SROs or the district's, and in parentheses, principal, teacher, other building level staff, application of the student code of conduct and discipline policy disproportionately impacting any one group of students?
Gotcha.
To cue up the conversation, is there a position description for SROs that can be shared? I think I assume that's like a job description then.
I think that previous question will be handled by number 3 on your document, Kelly.
Okay, yeah. And I think I lifted this up of the total investment in security functions, which I know, which we talked about when number 15 with the cost.
Yeah.
Yep. And Terry would just, put the question out there. What are the 3 to 5 key data points that will help us arrive at a decision about SROs in our buildings? And then just lifting up the question of student voice and when we will have the benefit of student feedback to ensure the stakeholder group is represented at the table in our discussion. So lifting up the question of how we will receive that feedback from students. Are there any other questions to add or comments? I know it's a lengthy list.
Hey, Kelly, if you don't mind, the item that you were sharing prior to the disproportionate impact on certain groups of students, can you remember what it is that you said? I don't know if that sequentially
you could probably share Terry's notes.
Yeah, I'll share Terry's document, and then you don't have to capture all of it word for word.
Okay, that would be awesome. Okay, yep. Great. Yep. All right.
So it's all of this. I think we've got a very robust list here. Sorry, words are difficult this evening. We've got a very robust list this evening. What is our timeline, Tom? What do you anticipate? Because I know you'd wanted to move a little bit more quickly than my initial timeline, but it also seems like this is a lot of information that's going to take the team some time to track down.
You know, yeah, there is a lot here, and this is all really good, valid and appropriate requests. What I would offer, Kirsten, and thank you for lifting that up, because this is a tall order with a lot of other really pressing things going on right now. What I'd like to do is to share as much as is possible with the board prior to our next meeting, and then perhaps reevaluate the list. I think some of this information, depending on what we can get together, some of the stuff may not seem as important if some of those other blanks are filled in. So what I'll endeavor to do is to share as much as we're able to garner prior to our September 15th meeting, and share that the Friday prior, so the board has that in advance and can sort of reassess if there's additional information that is needed. And then if more information is needed, or if there are questions that we really can't answer, that's likely going to be because the data just doesn't exist and there's not really a way to create it. So I think we can probably have as complete data set as is possible with the current state of record keeping that we have prior to the 15th. And then perhaps on the 15th, we could decide what we want the next steps to be. Does that sound appropriate?
Yeah, I think that seems to make the most sense.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think largely we can get most of this. Some of this stuff we won't be able to get as specifically as it's stated, but I think we can kind of get to the spirit of it. And I think if all of the available blanks, data that we have to fill in the blanks that have been called to question here, so the ones that remain may not have as much importance because the fuller picture will have been painted. And if we need to do more after that, certainly we're more than willing to do that. But I think we can get a pretty rich picture based on these questions prior to the 15th, and then we could maybe revisit where we are with the information set, and then decide what the next steps ought to be.
Okay, I think that sounds great. If there are no further comments, discussion on this topic, I believe those were our only two topics for discussion for our work session this evening. Yep. So Tom, if you don't have anything to add, I will the board is dismissing before 7:30 tonight. So I don't know what you guys are going to do with the rest of your night, but go do something fun or sit on your couch and don't do anything at all, I guess.
I'm going to dream about the days of 6,000 people at each meeting.
Yeah.
Well, remember, this is live streamed on YouTube, so there's many probably watching that didn't need to log into Teams. So,
and Tom, I just sent you Terry's comments. So
thank you.
Have those too.
Thank you, Kelly.
All right. Well, thank you, board. Tom, I will see you tomorrow afternoon. You and Mr. Smith and Ms. Bradley tomorrow afternoon at agenda planning, probably with Mr. Aurora. So I will see you all very soon, I'm sure.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
All right. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.